2311 Racing is planning expansion for 2025. Kurt Busch continues to talk about a potential return maybe in 2023. And Tony Stewart speaks about the possibility of returning at the Daytona 500 and also will run in the SRX full time. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about LA Golf. As it was announced a couple days ago on Wednesday morning that LA Golf is going to sponsor Austin Dillon and Kyle Busch in the Xfinity Series for the select races. They'll sponsor Austin Dillon this weekend at Auto Club, and then they'll sponsor Kyle Busch at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Really exciting stuff to see that LA Golf is stepping up to the plate and sponsoring Kaulig Racing, a new sponsor technically for Kyle Busch, and I'm glad that Kyle Busch continues to get new sponsors in this series, and glad to see that LA Golf is going to sponsor Kyle Busch and Austin Dillon in the upcoming races. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Dover Cup race, as their title sponsor has been officially revealed, and it's going to be called the Wurf 400. This is different than the last couple years where they had a different sponsor. I think it's good that they've got a new sponsor for the Dover Cup race, and it'll be called the Wurf 400. To be honest, I think it's a pretty good sounding sponsor, and it's pretty good that they've got a new sponsor for the Dover Cup race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about KSDT CPA. As it was announced yesterday, the KSDT CPA is going to sponsor Bayley Currey for 5 Xfinity Series races in 2023. I believe the first race will be this week in Auto Club, if I'm not mistaken. And they, of course, have been a loyal partner to the JD Motorsports brand for the last couple of years. And I'm glad to see that they're returning in 2023. It's exciting, and glad to see that they'll be returning in 2023 to sponsor Bayley Currey. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tyler Reddick. As they were talking about expecting to announce the Beast car, and they have officially unveiled the Beast car, the Beast Unleashed car that Tyler Reddick is going to run in multiple races this season, including this weekend at Auto Club. I'm going to be honest, I am extremely disappointed with this paint scheme. I thought they were going to do a little bit more. It's basically the same Monster Energy car with basically just Beast colors on it. I just don't understand why they couldn't have maybe made a few changes. I think it's very disappointing. And personally, I think they could have done a better job. It's not the best looking scheme. I've seen better for sure. And I'll be honest, they could have done a much better job on this paint scheme. In my opinion, they could have for sure done a way better job on this scheme. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Advance Auto Parts. As it was announced on Wednesday morning that Advance Auto Parts is becoming a new partner of IndyCar, growing its relationship with the Penske Empire and taking over checker flag positions at every single IndyCar race. This is really exciting stuff. Advance Auto Parts has been growing its brand in motorsports in general, including NASCAR, and now it joins IndyCar as well. Obviously, of course, Advance Auto Parts has a pretty big relationship with Team Penske, so it's not a big shock and a big surprise that they're doing this, but it's in general, I think it's really exciting to see, and glad to see that they're now working together. Really exciting stuff for sure. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sugar Land Shines. As it was announced on Tuesday evening, the Sugar Land Shines, through its connections in NASCAR, Sugar Land Shine has set up a new B2B deal with Cheddar's to start selling a mixed drink that uses Dale Jr.'s High Rock Vodka as an ingredient. Cheddar's will roll out the drink in its stores nationally starting in March. This is really exciting to see that Cheddar's, of course, has a big partnership with Kyle Busch and also Rich Schultz Racing, and now they're partnering up with Dale Jr. and his High Rock Vodka brand. This is really exciting to see. I think it's big for both brands in general, and I think it's awesome to see that they're doing this. This is great. This is incredible and amazing to see that they are going to be having this partnership now going forward. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about that Fontana purse money. As Bob Parker scores every single time we have a NASCAR race, whether it's a Cup, Xfinity Series, or truck race, when we do have a race, he reveals the purse money. And for the Cup Series, it's $8,484,302. For the Xfinity Series, it's $1,659,396. This is really good to see. Of course, the Cup money comes with the charters and such, but that still is a lot of money for a Cup Series race. And of course, Daytona 500 had around 25 to 26 million. This drops at about 2/3 of what that money is, but overall, it's not that bad. And that, of course, is the purse money for this weekend. And to be honest, that is some pretty solid and some pretty good purse money still, regardless, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As it was announced yesterday that IndyCar will have some new tires for the street races, and Firestone will introduce green guanyu tires for alternate compounds for street races. This, of course, debuted at Nashville last year, the Nashville Street Course Race, which there's talk of that event is going to be continuing going forward in the long term. Of course, I believe this is the contract year for that IndyCar event at Nashville. Now they'll be introducing those green guanyu tires as an alternate. Instead of the red Firestone tires, they're going to be using the alternates, which, of course, are the green. I think it's very interesting that they're doing that. I think it is really exciting, though, and in my opinion, it's really cool to see they're going to be introducing some new tires for the IndyCar series on a full-time basis. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about F1. As Adam Stern reported yesterday, the ESPN will have the same ad presentation this year for F1 with a small graphic in the corner, likely with the mother's polishing, but no full screen and split picture commercials. Now, a lot of NASCAR fans are going to look at this and say, hey, Fox, you need to do this, and I entirely agree. However, F1 doesn't pay as much to ESPN. I think ESPN pays about an $80 to $90 million fee for their broadcast, and NASCAR also has to pay a lot more money than F1 does for their TV deals, considering F1 is paying less money to ESPN than NASCAR is with their current TV deal. But this is one of the reasons why Formula One is growing in the United States is because of their presentations and their broadcast. That's a big factor why this is happening, that they continue to grow, and they will continue to grow with this big presentation. The fact that there are no full-screen commercials, and I think F1 has spoiled a lot of us racing fans over the years. This overall, in my opinion, is really good, though, that they are doing this, and in my opinion, I love that there's going to be no full-screen ads for F1 races because you get to enjoy the whole race, you don't miss any of the action on the track, and in general, I think it's big for the sport that they continue to do this for Formula One because it is going to continue to grow Formula One long-term, and in general, it is really good to see, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Daytona TV ratings. Now, we've already talked about the Daytona 500 TV ratings, but the other ratings came out from this past weekend at Daytona International Speedway for the other three big races. First, the Truck Series before the rain delay had 1.027 million viewers. This would actually have been up from last year's race, which I think had 1.010 million. So it would have been up about 20,000 more viewers for this event than it did last year. Not a big increase there. For the ARCA race, it would have been 846,000 viewers, which is up, I think, about 10 to 15% or something like that. A huge increase from last year. Of course, we saw Greg Van Alst pick up his first career victory, and our congratulations to him on that. For the Xfinity Series, it was 1.686 million viewers, which is a large audience for an Xfinity Series race. Xfinity normally does not get that big of an audience, and it was up. And it gives me open confidence because it shows that basically the lower series are growing. Cup Series would definitely be doing a lot better, but the NASCAR hardcore fans are growing and growing and growing, which is exciting to see. And those, I think it's really exciting to see, and those are the TV ratings for the other races that happen. Really exciting stuff, and very happy to see that the ratings went up, at least in that area. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about North Wilkesboro. Now, multiple reporters, including Kelly Grandal, were at North Wilkesboro looking at some of the renovations and updates of those renovations that have been revealed. They are, of course, building the Saver Barrier at this point. There's a lot of things that they continue to do to North Wilkesboro. Remember, later this year in late May, so about 3 months from now, NASCAR will be returning to North Wilkesboro for the first time since the 1996 season. The Truck Series will have the first points-paying race for any of NASCAR's top three divisions since 1996. And NASCAR, of course, is going to host the All-Star race. They continue to work on things. They've got pit road bases set up, and they're getting very close to having a lot of the things done. In general, this is really, really exciting stuff overall, and I'm very happy to see that North Wilkesboro continues to get work done. We want to see North Wilkesboro continue to get work done, and I'm glad to see they are continuing to work toward a pretty big future there. It's really exciting stuff, and very happy to see that they continue to work to getting that there, because they're getting closer and closer to having North Wilkesboro closer to being done. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Fox. Now, I'm not sure if Denny Hamlin was joking or not, but Denny Hamlin was on his podcast that he does, which is a really, really good podcast. I think it's like Denny Hamlin's Altercations or something like that. And Denny Hamlin's podcast, they talked about the Fox cartoons and talk about how they made some changes to the cartoons, talking about the goatees are gone. And Denny Hamlin, I'm not sure if he's joking or not, but he showed the fact that his goatee was basically gone. And apparently they had a meeting, he said, and said that potentially we could see, in general, all the cartoon characters gone. If this is true and all the cartoon characters are gone for Fox, this is a major step in the right direction. And it needs to happen because I'm going to be honest and for real, those cartoon characters completely frustrate me. And I don't like the cartoon characters in general. So if they could find a way to get rid of those cartoon characters at Fox and actually use real driver renders, I'm going to be a much happier person. So I really hope this is true because I hate the cartoon characters. They're bad. I don't like them in general. And it's, in my honest opinion, the sooner we can get rid of the cartoon characters, the better it's going to be for everybody. So if it's true that the cartoon characters are gone, I think this is a major step in the right direction. I hope it's true that the cartoon characters are gone because I hate them and I do not like them in any shape or form. I hope truly that they are gone, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Alvin Kamara. Now, NASCAR has a couple stories around things that they have no comment on, and the first thing is they have no comment on the situation with Alvin Kamara. I'm not really going to get into too many details on the Alvin Kamara situation, but Alvin Kamara apparently is suing somebody from what I understand. Apparently he's been going to court for certain situations I'm not really going to get into. And in general, what happened to Alvin Kamara is a pretty big deal also because Alvin Kamara is part of NASCAR. I think he's like the growth and leadership side. I think he's a leader of that growth and leadership side in branding and growth and development in our sports. So not the greatest look to have that happen overall, but I'm not surprised that NASCAR really has no comment on this situation. I don't blame him in that essence in that situation, and I'm not shocked or surprised that they really don't have any comment on that situation with Alvin Kamara, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about FRS Racing. As FRS Racing will be making a driver announcement on February 28th for their debut. Now, this is a new team that's coming around. They basically brought all the assets to Brandon-Built Motorsports. The goal for this team is eventually go full-time by 2024, but they plan to debut on April 1st at Richmond Raceway. So about a month from now, when this announcement happens, they will be going ahead and making their debut, and they plan to make a driver announcement. Now, the big question is, who is going to be the driver that potentially could drive? I honestly could see it being Brandon Brown. Why? Well, Colin Fern was big manager at the Brandon-Built Motorsports team, and with Brandon-Built Motorsports no longer being around, I would have to imagine that there's a pretty good chance that Brandon Brown could end up being the driver of this car. It wouldn't shock or surprise me if he does end up becoming the driver of this car. So, in my opinion, I think it's going to be Brandon Brown. That's just my prediction at this point. It will be Brandon Brown. I could be wrong and it ends up being somebody else. But right now, at this particular moment, my prediction at this moment is going to be, I think it's going to be Brandon Brown. We'll have to wait and see what happens, who it does actually end up being for the future. But right now, in my opinion, I think it will end up being Brandon Brown. It'll be announced on Tuesday next week who it will be. But I think it'll be Brandon Brown who will be the driver of that car. I think Brandon Brown's a very talented driver. He deserves an opportunity. And the fact he's not in the Xfinity Series field is a big, big tragedy and a very unfortunate situation. That being said, though, I think it'll be Brandon Brown. And that's my prediction currently at the moment. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jeffrey Earnhardt. Now, Jeff Earnhardt was on the Dale Jr. Down this past week and was on the Dale Jr. Down earlier this week. And he revealed, and John Newby from Heavy NASCAR reported on this, but he reports that Jeff Earnhardt revealed during the podcast that he has a one-year deal with Alpha Prime Racing. Now, Jeff Earnhardt will be competing full-time with Alpha Prime Racing this year, but at the end of the year right now, he is going to be a free agent. But again, we are very early in the season, so this could expand from a one-year deal to maybe a two-year deal. This also, I believe, is the first time that Jeffrey has been full-time in NASCAR's top divisions, I think since like 2015 or 2016. So Jeffrey has to impress. Now, don't get me wrong, Jeffrey Earnhardt got screwed at Daytona. There's no doubt about that. He kind of got screwed there and was going to get a top 10 finish, which would have been big for Alpha Prime Racing. But Jeffrey's going to have a lot of great runs. And I really do think Jeffrey will have some good runs with the Alpha Prime Racing group this year. I think Jeffrey's a better driver than people give him credit for. He just hasn't had the opportunity a lot of times, which he did drive for Joe Gibbs Racing. And to be fair, he did pretty relatively well with Joe Gibbs Racing to select starts. This is the best opportunity he's had in quite some time, and I think he will make the most of that opportunity, to be honest. I really think he will, and I think he'll give the best runs he can for this team. That being said, though, it's interesting that right now it's only a one-year deal with the team. I would have thought maybe it would be more, but right now, at this current moment, it's only a one-year deal with the Alpha Prime Racing Group, but it could expand or could decrease. We'll just have to wait and see what happens to Jeffrey Earnhardt, and it depends on sponsorship funding because there's 7 races that he said as well that still need to be sponsored as well. So we'll see what happens, but Jeffrey currently at the moment is on a one-year deal with the Alpha Prime Racing Group. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about LGB Coin. Now, along with the Alvin Kamara news, NASCAR also has no comment on lawsuit by foundation created by LGB Coin founder over sponsorship for Brandon Brown. Now, a very interesting note, apparently that sponsorship for the LGB Coin apparently was supposed to be $5 million worth of sponsorship for Brandon Brown for when his sponsor came around last year. This would have been huge money for Brandon Brown that they could have used. But it's basically a meme coin, which it was basically a meme coin after a situation that happened with Brandon Brown. Now, this situation is a two-way street, in my opinion. On one hand, I feel terrible for Brandon Brown because Brandon Brown got put into that position due to what happened at Talladega in 2021. And it was a very unfortunate situation. And that's where the front stretch interviews came in, and why a lot of the front stretch interview complaining came in was because of that situation. And honestly, that could have been completely avoided if they didn't bring up that situation. But you know why people bring up the situation, and Kelly Stabbutt's made a pretty innocent mistake, in my opinion, though. She also did make a pretty big mistake at the same time as well. On the other hand, though, not smart decision to accept the coin that is a meme coin. Not smart decision. I can't blame NASCAR completely for not accepting the sponsorship. They could have done a better job trying to find maybe a different sponsor. And apparently, from what we heard, Larry's Hard Lemonade tried to sponsor him for more races, but Brandon did not budge because of this coin. So Brandon could have done a better job, and we all could have done a better job in that situation. That being said, no, I'm not surprised that there is not much speaking on the situation. It doesn't shock me, or it does not surprise me currently at this particular moment that there's not much comment other than that on that situation, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Roper. As it was announced on Wednesday late afternoon that Corey Roper has been indefinitely suspended by NASCAR. Now, why has Corey Roper been indefinitely suspended by NASCAR? Well, it's due to the substance abuse policy. Now, for those who know, Corey Roper owns Roper Racing, the 04 truck that is being run by Caden Honeycutt for a few races this year and could expand to more races depending on how Caden Honeycutt does perform throughout the year. Caden's a very talented driver. It's just a very unfortunate situation, though, that his team owner and former driver, Corey, has been suspended for substance abuse policy. Now, NASCAR did not expand on what exactly he did, what substances he took, and I don't blame them for not expanding on it because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I can't blame NASCAR in that situation. But in this situation, they did go ahead and suspend him. It's unfortunate this happened, but you can't be doing that kind of stuff if you want to stick around. You got to be careful. We don't know exactly what he did, but at the same token, whatever he did, it got him suspended, and I'm not surprised. If you do certain substances, you're going to get suspended by NASCAR, and you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So I don't know how long he's basically on the road to recovery. We'll see how long he's gone. Hopefully, he'll be back in NASCAR in the foreseeable future. But at this particular moment, he's been indefinitely suspended by NASCAR. We'll see if things change, and he'll get back in the sport. We'll have to see how long it takes, and hopefully he will return soon. But it's one thing to watch for sure in the foreseeable future, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about John Hunter Nemechek. As it was announced yesterday early morning that John Hunter Nemechek will drive the 17 for Tricon Garage for multiple races this season. He'll be running in Las Vegas next weekend in the Truck Series, and then we'll run it at Atlanta a couple weeks later down the road. Now, John Hunter Nemechek, of course, is competing full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year for Joe Gibbs Racing, and this is just to get him a little more experience being back in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. But also, one of the reasons why they have chosen John Hunter Nemechek is because John Hunter Nemechek has a lot of Truck Series experience, and because Taylor Gray, who's supposed to drive that 17 truck after the third race of the year at Atlanta, because he doesn't turn 18 years old until a little bit down the road. He's still eligible for a playoff waiver, but currently at the moment, he does not have a waiver. Now, going into those weekends, I think John Hunter is definitely going to be a threat. Now, Kyle Busch is going to compete in the truck race in Las Vegas, so I would imagine that Kyle Busch will probably be John Hunter. I'm just going to be honest on that. John Hunter's probably going to end up getting beaten in that race. But John Hunter, look at that Atlanta race. John Hunter almost won the Atlanta race last year in the spring, and I think he could have a chance to get it done once again. If you want my prediction for John Hunter, I think he's got a really good chance to do well with Tricon Garage in those select races. I think he's going to have a big year in Xfinity, I'm just going to be honest. But I really think that John Hunter could have a pretty big year this year in a series that he runs, and I'm excited to see what John Hunter can do in those select truck series races. Gets a little more experience, so I don't think he needs as much experience, but it's good to bring someone in for Tricon, and this is only for 2 more weeks, and then he will basically be back to focusing completely on Xfinity and not running in those truck series races. So I'm not shocked or surprised in any shape or form that has happened, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Auto Club. Someone asked about the future of Auto Club Speedway after this year. And Bob Pockrass reported about Auto Club that the future is still, to be honest, to be announced and to be determined. They're not selling the facility, and plan is still to convert it to a half-mile track. There will be no races in 2024, which had already got announced during the LA Coliseum weekend during the Busch Light Clash weekend at the LA Coliseum. They had already announced that. Now, 2025 is still a pretty big possibility, and it's still currently to be determined at this point if Auto Club will still happen in 2025, but it's all going to depend on basically supply chains and stuff, because California, with their supply chain stuff, it can still be a major, major problem. Now, speaking about Auto Club and stuff, I'm not shocked or surprised, because one of the reasons why they've had trouble getting this thing going and why they haven't been able to convert this track at this point until very recently to a half-mile track is because of the fact that basically it's due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's a big factor into why that this took so long to really get rolling and get the ball rolling in this situation. Now, in regards to Auto Club and stuff, this feels like the Brett Favre, because this is going to be the third last race that's basically happened at Auto Club. It was supposed to be the last race in 2020. Then we had the pandemic. Then in 2022, it's supposed to be the last race, and then they basically waited another year to do another 2-mile race, and now this could be the last 2-mile race we have, but who knows at this point. But we know for sure there's not going to be a race in 2024. That has been confirmed at this point. There will not be a race in 2024, but 2025 could still be a pretty big possibility. Now, big question surrounding it is what is going to replace Auto Club, because of the fact and reasons alone that there needs to be a race there for the West Coast Swing. I think Sonoma should go there, to be honest with you. Sonoma makes a lot more sense to be in the West Coast Swing. I think there needs to be a road course in the first 2 races of the year. I know COTA is technically early in the schedule, but it's a little more down the road in the schedule. And in my opinion, I'd rather have Sonoma in the spring because the track looks a lot better in the spring than it does in June. I'm just going to be honest about that. The track looks way better in the spring than it does there. But I also do completely understand why fans probably wouldn't want that. But like I said, if you want my personal opinion, we move Auto Club, we move Sonoma early in the spring and bring Rockingham or put Montreal on the schedule. But I would rather have Rockingham on the schedule because there's talk Rockingham wants to come back and there's conversation about the future about that. So we'll see what happens in regards to the situation with Auto Club, but there will not be a race next year, and I'm not surprised or shocked that there will not be a race next year in 2024. To be honest with you, no shock and surprise there, and it doesn't surprise me in any shape or form, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Tony Stewart. Now, we've got a couple articles from Sportsnet.com that Austin Kensky reported. Here's the first one. So, Tony Stewart spoke about the possibility of running the Daytona 500 once again. And what he said is that ship has sailed currently at the moment. Now, he did mention that there still is a potential possibility that he could run at Bristol Dirt, whether that's for the Cup Series or the Truck Series is still to be determined, but Tony Stewart could still run those events. The reason Tony Stewart says that ship has sailed is because he saw with Jimmie Johnson. He got asked those questions because Jimmie Johnson just ran the Daytona 500, and he's basically declined that opportunity. Now, going back and talking about Bristol Dirt, I would love for Tony Stewart to make a return in NASCAR run at Bristol Dirt, whether that is with the Cup Series or with the Truck Series. It would be very fun to see Tony Stewart run it. Now, a lot of people ask why Tony Stewart really isn't running NASCAR in general. Well, the reason Tony Stewart isn't running NASCAR in general currently at the moment is because of the fact that he's focused currently on the NHRA. Tony Stewart is going to be running the full NHRA season in 2023 with the Mick Phillips Racing organization, so he has a lot of focus currently on that at the moment and has to focus on that at this particular moment. But we could see Tony Stewart maybe make a one-off return in NASCAR, which I think would be really big for the sport in general, if a driver like Tony Stewart decided to make a one-off return. But him running the Daytona 500, it didn't really make a lot of sense either. Tony Stewart's a much older driver. Tony Stewart is, going to be 52 years old on May 20th of this year. So Tony Stewart's definitely starting to get a little bit older and up there in age. And I think focusing more on being owner of NASCAR. Plus, Tony Stewart, remember, we publicly talk about this, but Tony Stewart hasn't been as happy with NASCAR. So it was surprising that he came back and decided to come back and run and do some commentary with NASCAR. That being said, though, it doesn't surprise or shock when Tony Stewart isn't going to run Daytona 500 going forward in the foreseeable future. Doesn't surprise me, but at the same token, same time, it would have been really awesome and very, very cool if he did decide to run NASCAR, because I think it would be really fun for the sport in general, and maybe he decides to come back and run a one-off in NASCAR, because remember, he was talking about doing some one-offs in NASCAR, and the rumors as early as last year that he was going to run the Indy Road Course race in Xfinity. A lot of people thought that was going to happen in 2022, and he was actually supposed to run the Indy Road Course race in 2020 in the Xfinity Series, but unfortunately, that kind of fell through at the last minute. That being said, though, I do hope Tony Stewart does get the opportunity, maybe in the foreseeable future, decides he wants to run it, and maybe we'll see him run a one-off in NASCAR, but we're going to have to wait and see if he decides in the foreseeable future if he wants to run that, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we've talked about Kyle Busch quite a bit on this channel over the last 2 weeks, and it's for good reason. But we're going to talk about something that I didn't really talk much about on the channel, and it's due to an article that kind of came out due to some comments made by David Wilson at Daytona Speedweeks. And Toyota's owner, the guy who runs the operations for TRD, David Wilson, they discussed Kyle Busch leaving. And I paraphrase the quote just a little bit. He says, "I was the one touting everything that Kyle Busch and Toyota have done together. He will be missed. It's not going to happen overnight. There are days that we will miss Kyle, and there are days that we will not miss Kyle Busch." Basically, take that as much as you will. Basically, he's not being completely serious. And I think that there are a lot of people that took this and said, look, David Wilson maybe is making some really bad comments against Kyle Busch in this situation. And I think that David Wilson's probably a little bit frustrated Kyle Busch did leave on his own terms, because let's be honest, TRD, they wanted to keep Kyle Busch. It was Joe Gibbs Racing that made the decision, inevitably, to not keep Kyle Busch around. And now you've got a team like Tricon Garage coming, which was formerly David Gilliland Racing, and they're basically coming. They basically are coming in now, and they're becoming the new KBM in the Truck Series, because they're the new Toyota Truck Series team. But looking at the situation with Kyle Busch in that situation there, you think about Kyle Busch and stuff and everything that he's been able to accomplish in the sport and stuff, and did everything for Toyota. Kyle Busch won like 16 Cup Series races, including exhibition races for the team. He won the day. He didn't win the 500, but he won the Brickyard 400, won the Southern 500, won the Coke 600. He won 2 championships and won the Xfinity Series Championship 2009, and also brought a lot of really great development into the Toyota stable as well. He brought in William Byron from that area. Yes, he was loaned from Junior Motorsports, but he brought William Byron in. He brought Noah Gragson in. Look at what Noah Gragson's doing now. He nearly won the Xfinity Series Championship last year. He brought in other drivers like Bubba Wallace. Helped Bubba Wallace. I think Bubba drove for KBN, if I'm not mistaken. He brought in a lot of great talent into the sport and helped Toyota really, really grow. And I think Kyle Busch not being at Toyota is going to hurt Toyota in the long run. Granted, though, you do have Cristobal in there, which is a young talent. You've also got Ty Gibbs. But it's going to be really hard for those drivers to replicate what Kyle Busch has done. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of talent with those drivers that have come in from KBM and stuff, and you look at some of the talent that's come through the ranks of Kyle Busch Motorsports. But if you want my honest and sincere opinion, you think about everything that Kyle Busch has accomplished and what he's been able to do to help a team like his team and those organizations that he's been able to help out over the years. And in my opinion, like I've already said and mentioned here, I do believe that Kyle Busch does play a role and does play a factor, and he's been able to contribute a lot for those teams. So overall, like I said, in my opinion, I think Toyota was a little bit frustrated, but also the comments shouldn't be taken seriously. They got taken out of context, but I also do think that Toyota was also, in a sense, a little bit frustrated with Kyle Busch. So we'll see what happens long term, how much effect Kyle Busch not being there is going to affect the team, but I do think it will have somewhat effect on that organization in the short-term period, to be honest with you. Go ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tony Stewart. As the SRX made a late night announcement as they announced that Tony Stewart will run the full SRX season once again in 2023. Tony Stewart, the inaugural champion in 2021 and one of the co-owners of the SRX, will be looking to win his second championship in the SRX in 2023. It's really great to see that Tony Stewart is returning to the SRX in 2023. Tony Stewart, of course, has been extremely successful in the SRX, won a lot of races in the SRX throughout his career so far in the SRX, and has accomplished a lot in the sport. And Tony Stewart will be joining a long list of drivers that have been confirmed so far for the SRX up to this point. And the list continues to get longer and longer. This week, it already has been announced that Kenny will also be driving the season finale at Lucas Oil. And Tony Stewart joins other list of drivers that will be competing in the SRX. Hailie Deegan, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski is going to be full-time this year. Julio Castroneves is back. Clint Bowyer is going to be part of the SRX this season. Bobby Labonte is also going to be there as well, among other drivers, and Ryan Newman, of course. A lot of drivers continue to be joining the SRX, and I think the biggest reason is because on ESPN on Thursday nights, and we're continuing to see a lot of big names that will be in the SRX this year. And there's still other names likely that will be confirmed over time as well. Now, talking about Tony Stewart being back in the SRX, I think it is very fun to see that Tony Stewart continues to be part of the SRX, along with competing full-time in NHRA this season in the mods with Mick Phillips Racing. It is great to see that Tony will be back this year, because I think he will be very competitive in the SRX. I think he's going to be a championship contender in the SRX this year, and I think he'll do a very fantastic and a really good job. And I think he could win a second championship in the 3 years, because he was the inaugural champion in 2021, beat Ernie Francis Jr. there, and in 2022 didn't have as good of a year, yet I think he still won a race last year in 2022 as well. And I have to imagine in 2023, though, I do think with all the competition coming in this year in 2023, it is going to be a lot harder to win a lot more races, because you have a lot of younger talent that could be coming to the series. And there still is possibly more drivers that could be announced in the foreseeable future. What about guys like Chase Elliott? Chase Elliott's probably been asked to join the SRX once again. He's been part of the SRX the last couple of years. What about Kyle Larson? Kyle Larson never raced in the SRX. I would imagine that he would love to come to the SRX and race there. What about Ryan Blaney once again? Ryan Blaney's been interested. We know that he's been in the SRX last year. He joined and basically went up against his dad last year. It'd be fun for him to join. And what about other superstars from other forms of racing? What about Michael Waltrip, Paul Tracy? Those two have been in the SRX the last couple of years. What if they come in? Those guys are still major possibilities that could enter the series, by the way. And I think there's a chance that both of them could enter the series in the foreseeable future. But regardless, though, it is exciting stuff to see that they're talking about maybe making a potential return in the foreseeable future, and we'll see what happens. But it sounds like we could be getting closer to foreseeable future, and glad to see that Tony Stewart is back on a full-time basis, and maybe we'll see more drivers enter the SRX, because the more superstars that get in the series, because of course it's a superstar racing experience. And I think this year, compared to other years, it is a more exciting SRX because you have a lot of younger guys coming in, which I think in general, it's really big for the SRX. So really excited to see the SRX is coming back, and you got Tony Stewart coming back on a full-time basis. It's going to be really fun to see you there. I hope they get Alan Bestwick for the commentary, because it'll be a little nostalgic. Alan Bestwick on ESPN, because it's been a few years since he's been with ESPN, since 2018 or 2019. And I think in general, it's fun to see that Tony Stewart, though, will be part of the SRX once again in 2023 on a full-time basis, because I thought this was going to happen. It hadn't been confirmed, and now it's officially confirmed. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, we kind of talked about Kurt Busch a couple days ago on the channel, but there's a little more details that kind of came out about Kurt Busch on a possible return. And he spoke to multiple reporters this past week, and Austin Kanensky reported on it from Sportsnet. And Kurt Busch basically said that he is definitely enjoying his new role at 23XI Racing and is still working on returning in the foreseeable future. He basically said that there was that Tyler Reddick announcement later in the week, which of course was that big Monster Energy Beast Unleashed scheme. There was a Ty Gibbs video that they filmed, and now he's waiting on the green light to get back. Now, what is that green light for Kurt Busch? Well, a couple things. One, sponsorship and funding, though he does got Monster Energy backing, and he's still part of the Monster Energy brand, so I would have to imagine it's not really due to sponsorship. The big thing is on Kurt Busch's health. Kurt Busch has talked publicly about his health, and it seems like on a week-to-week basis, we continue to hear about a potential return for Kurt Busch. And it sounds like with things, it's sounding more and more likely that he is going to be eventually coming back to the sport and maybe running a few races. Now, if Kurt Busch does make a return to NASCAR, and I don't think we're too far from maybe getting a return, when will he return? I won't think it'll be at least for, I think it'll be at least for a few more weeks because he's still basically, he's in the final stages in the steps. But they do believe that by the end of this year, he will make a few starts. Now, one thing interesting, is that this regardless was going to be Kurt Busch's final season, and him and Kevin Harvick were going to retire from full-time racing together at the end of this season. But they are both going to be racing. Of course, Kevin Harvick is retiring full-time racing in this year and also racing the SRX this year. But Kevin Harvick will retire at the end of the 2023 season. Kurt Busch was also supposed to retire at the end of this year, so this was going to be his last year regardless racing in the series. Now, talk about Kurt Busch also as well. He's really enjoying his new role, and I wouldn't be shocked or surprised in the future with how much work Kurt Busch is doing with 23XI Racing being the new role. Consultant drivers like Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace and even Travis Pastrana, who drove for the team, which we don't think Travis is ever coming back, let's be honest, at least in the Cup Series, because Travis has ruled out making another start at this point. But Kurt Busch, you look at what he's been able to accomplish and everything that he's been able to do in the sport, and I think it won't be long for Kurt comes back. I think he'll drive the 67 car. That's the car that they ran, of course, and they're not going to run it this week in Auto Club, but they could run it in select races, and we might be in the foreseeable future hearing about that. But in my opinion, I really want Kurt Busch to come back soon. I miss seeing Kurt Busch in the sport because when I was younger, I wasn't the biggest fan of Kurt Busch. But when it was announced he wasn't going to be running full-time in 2023, I was so disappointed and really sad as a fan. So I truly hope Kurt Busch does make a return in the foreseeable future. It sounds like we're getting closer to that, hopefully, which that's a big thumbs up for me, because if Kurt Busch can return to the sport, I think it's better for everybody, because a lot of fans miss Kurt. Kurt is one of the best drivers to ever race in NASCAR and racing in general, has accomplished a lot in his career, ran the Indy 500, finished 6th in his debut, which is extremely impressive, and I've just been so incredibly impressed at everything Kurt Busch has been to accomplish in his career. It sounds like maybe in the future we could be getting a Kurt Busch return. I hope we see him back. He wants to return. We know he wants to come back to race. He never officially retired altogether. He retired full-time racing, but he didn't retire altogether. So maybe soon we're going to have a Kurt Busch return, and I really hope he does return because, like I said and mentioned already, I'm missing Kurt Busch behind the wheel of a Cup Series car. He may not run as well, though. Let's be honest, because Kurt Busch is 44, 45 years old. He's a much older driver now, so he's probably not going to run as well when he does come back, but I just want to see Kurt Busch come back and race once again because I miss seeing Kurt come back. They're working on the final steps and stages. It sounds like we could be seeing a Kurt Busch return not too far from down the road. I really hope it does happen and Kurt Busch does decide to return. I hope he comes back, and it sounds like he could speak and could be back in the foreseeable future not too far down the road. We'll see what happens, and it sounds like we're getting close to potential return for Kurt Busch. So hopefully it does return, and we'll see if he does return in the foreseeable future. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about 23XI Racing. Now, we spoke about 23XI Racing around Kurt Busch, but another big story around 23XI Racing is the fact that they are actually talking about potentially expanding in the foreseeable future. Now, this is not the first time we've talked and heard about expansion with the 23XI Racing group, but it sounds like we could be getting expansion very, very soon with 23XI Racing. Now, Steve LaLetta was basically in that media zone that they were doing during Daytona week, I believe on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, or Friday, early Friday, if I'm not mistaken. And Steve LaLetta says is that it may not be in 2024 with expansion. It might be in 2025 or beyond. But it definitely is part of the plans for 23XI Racing. And 23XI Racing has said this publicly, but they want to eventually expand to a 3 to 4 car operation. Now, in 2022, the history of 23XI Racing, in 2021, they were a 1-car operation with Bubba Wallace. In 2022, they became a 2-car operation with Bubba Wallace and Kurt Busch. And in 2023, they had 2 full-time cars and 1 part-time car for Travis Pastrana. And Kurt Busch, if he does officially return to the sport in 2023, whenever he does decide to return, he will get an opportunity and chance to drive the car because he wants to come back and return. Now, speaking about 23XI Racing's return, they're working on building a shop currently at the moment. We've discussed this, that they are building a shop in that headquarters in Huntersville, North Carolina, and they are doing that. Now, if 23XI Racing is expand, and they eventually do expand, maybe in 2024, who would they end up maybe go after and get? Now, obviously, there's not a lot of drivers that are going to be available in 2024 or 2025. Now, Denny Hamlin could possibly go to 23XI. It is possible Denny could race at 23XI. Denny's under a contract here currently at Joe Gibbs Racing, and a lot of it depends on if FedEx does return or not. Denny has said this, that he would love to run for his team, maybe on a one-off. He wants to retire with Joe Gibbs Racing, but he would love to make a one-off or two-off with his own organization that he currently owns. So he could be a potential possibility. But there's other possibilities from the Toyota stable that could be available in the upcoming years. First one is John Hunter Nemechek. John Hunter Nemechek currently at this particular moment drives for Joe Gibbs Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I know that Joe Gibbs would probably want to convert John Hunter up to drive maybe for Denny Hamlin or Mark Truex Jr., but if 23XI Racing does become available next year and they do decide to expand on a full-time basis, John Hunter could be a potential possibility right there. He's a very talented driver and has also driven for 23XI Racing. Remember, he made a one-off start for 23XI at Homestead, substituting for Bubba Wallace. So John Hunter could be a potential possibility, and he's a very talented driver and would probably get the best out of his equipment. What about a driver, I don't know, like Matt DiBenedetto? I know that's a crazy name to mention, but Matt DiBenedetto could potentially be a possibility. Anything's possible. And Denny Hamlin probably likes Matt DiBenedetto, and Matt's probably going to get the best out of his equipment with Rocco WAR Racing. What if he gets the opportunity and shout? That would not be a bad shout. He's a talented driver. I know a lot of people don't agree with me on this probably, and that's fine. But what about him? He could be a potential possibility, and that wouldn't be a really, really bad shout. Then you think about Sammy Smith. Sammy Smith could also be a possibility. I don't think Sammy Smith is completely ready for the Cup Series, not even close to being ready, but Sammy Smith could be a potential shout in the future if they decide to go with him. And then you think about some of the lower series stuff with the Tricon Garage Group. There's guys coming up over there. Eventually, drivers like Williams Sawalich could be available. I know Williams only 16 years old, but he probably ain't going to be long before he's moving up. And then you think about other drivers that could be free agents at the end of the year. What about Todd Gilliland? Todd Gilliland could be not a bad shout. He's a very talented driver and can get the best out of his equipment. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think Todd Gilliland's going to be back in front row next year. I know it's all business and stuff. We know that there was a situation with front row came up very, very recently. So I think Todd Gilliland could be a potential possibility. That wouldn't be a bad shout. Todd Gilliland's a talented driver and knows how to get it done behind the wheel. And there's other drivers that they could go with that could be free agents. Corey LaJoie, we don't know about his future. Ty Dillon's driven for the team, so he could be a possibility. A lot of it's going to come down to sponsorship and funding, and maybe they go after somebody that we don't even know about at this point. I think anything's possible at this point, and nothing's completely off the table yet, but 23XI Racing's looking toward the future right now. They've got all the sponsorship they need. They've got funding with Monster Energy and DoorDash and McDonald's because they're picking up all the major brands. And they're this new school team, and they're starting to finally figure out their footing in the sport. I think 23XI Racing with Reddick and Bubba, they are going to have a big year in the Cup Series this year. I really think 23XI Racing is going to have a big year. And if Kurt Busch being like an advisor for the team and being there to help both Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace and giving them guidance and such, I really think this is going to be a huge year for 23XI Racing, and I think going into the future, this team is really going to hit it. They haven't done what Trackhouse accomplished yet at this point, but they're going to get there, in my opinion. I think there could be championship contenders coming out of that 23XI Racing group this year, not just with Tyler Reddick, because Reddick coming into the team is absolutely huge, but Bubba Wallace at that team as well. I think this is going to be a huge year for 23XI Racing, and I think it's going to be fun to watch what this team does. So it is really exciting stuff overall for sure, and it's really great to see this. Sounds like a return could have for Kurt Busch, and also sounds like 23XI Racing toward their expansion. They're headed toward a really bright future, and it's really exciting for the team, to be honest with you. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Notifications on to be notified when a video does go live on that channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below over that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Kurt Busch potentially returning in the foreseeable future? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about 23XI Racing talking about expansion for as early as 2024 potentially? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have a NASCAR race review for the Xfinity Series if the race does happen, and also starting lineup for the Cup race, though those could be in jeopardy due to the weather, so the Xfinity review might be happening Sunday night, considering the fact that the Xfinity Series race might be happening on Sunday night with the weather. Sunday's looking good, though, and that race should be happening on time. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.